Good morning, everyone, or whatever is the proper greeting of the day in your time zone. I hope you're all doing well. It is 10 o'clock, and because our construction clinics are a more limited time frame, I'm not going to do the usual webinar thing that some people do of hello, hello, hello. I'm just going to jump right in with the good stuff. All right, so who is the ICCP? Who are we, and what do we do? Let's have a look. If my screen will cooperate. 1 second. There we go. All right. So what is the ICCP? The Institute of Construction Claims Practitioners is a professional member organization, and we exist to recognize the skills, qualifications, and expertise that are needed to professionally manage construction claims. So we were established with an aim of establishing international professional standards, giving recognition to those who meet those standards, and to help educate those who would like to. And why is there a need for the ICCP? Well, quite simply, despite all of the other construction organizations that exist, construction claims have become a key part of the construction industry, and claims practitioners come from a broad variety of backgrounds, from QS, engineers, even legal, whatever. So there is no other organization until the ICCP which has met the unique needs of claims practitioners. So until the ICCP was established, there was no institute that specifically recognize those who have the specialist knowledge, experience, and skills to be able to manage, prepare, and respond to claims to the highest levels of professionalism. Okay, and I will quickly introduce the steering committee. We have our executive officer, Andy, who will be speaking today, our president, Paul Gibbons, Christiaan Grooskopf, who I've mispronounced his name, but he will also be speaking today, Lee Sporrell, who will be stepping down at the end of the year when we have our elections, and Mark Watson. Nina is a general manager, and I'm currently filling in while she's on maternity leave. Okay, in terms of membership, we have 3 levels of membership for individuals, and each have their own levels of experience and qualifications which must be met. And we also have a corporate membership available. And why should you benefit? Why should you join? What's in it for you? Well, we have a private member area, which is a growing library of templates, articles, white papers. We have compiled industry-specific books, and so you can see what the latest publications are. We have an area where you can see what trainings or education courses for further training are available. As I said, we have a large and ever-growing library of templates to save you time and make sure you get your claims done correctly. We have regular CPD webinars as well as these construction clinics. We also have member-only ICCP academies, which are more technical. We have discounts on books and training from Wiley Blackwell and Routledge publishers, as well as our training partner Claims Class. We have a monthly newsletter to keep you up to date. We have the industry exposure and certificate and logo, so you can let everyone know that you are a member of a professional organization. And we also have a private LinkedIn group where you can discuss your contracts and claims questions with other professionals. And optionally, we have the Register of Claims Practitioners for those who would like to increase their online profile and get additional exposure and highlight their skills and experience as a claims practitioner. Okay, if you would like to know more, if I have gone through that too quickly, please have a look at our website, instituteccp.com, or email me directly, Jennifer.J smith@instituteccp.com. And I will slow down and tell you in much more detail anything you would like to know. And with that, let's get to the main event. We're going to start today with Christiaan. Oh, sorry, before I get started with Christiaan, I will say, if you have a question, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. That's the one with the 2 speech bubbles rather than the chat. And then your question won't get lost. If you put your question in the chat, it might get lost, but I'll definitely see it if it's in the Q&A box. Okay, and so I think that's all of the housekeeping. With that, I will turn over to Christiaan, who will be answering the first question we have, which is regarding FIDIC Red Book, first edition, 1999. So I will go ahead and hand over to you, Christiaan.
Good day, everyone participating. I'm talking today from Thailand. And yes, the question is to give us a little, asked about the implication and the application of subclause 12.4 in the Red Book, and specifically omissions, and this ABC points we've got here. So if we quickly read through the clause, is whenever the omission of any work forms part or all of a variation, the value of which has not been agreed if, typically legal, not contractual terms, the contractor will incur or has incurred costs which, if the work had not been omitted, would have been deemed to be covered by a sum forming part of the accepted contract amount. And the omission of the work will result or has resulted in the sum not forming part of the contract price, and this cost is not deemed to be included in the valuation of any substituted work. Then the contractor shall give notice, etc. All right, so one of the first things we need to consider here is this little word, where are we? Come talk to me. That and there. In the English language, or for the non-native English speakers like myself, that and is actually quite important, because that and there says A and B and C has to apply before you can do the variation, the cost. So if all these 3 points are applicable, then the contractor shall give notice to the engineer accordingly with supporting particulars. And then the engineer will go through the process of subclause 3.5. All right, so but what does this actually mean? A lot of words, and you've got to be very careful how you read it to understand exactly where it's coming from. Now, the FIDIC Contracts Guide actually gives an incredibly good explanation of this clause. It says first that since subclause 13.3 concludes by referring the variations being valued under clause 12, and the quantity for the purpose of subclause 12.3 of an omitted item is 0, clause 12 concludes by entitling the contractor to compensation for the costs reasonably incurred in the expectation of carrying out a work subsequently omitted under the variation, etc., etc. And it says cost, usually not cost, which is the defined term. All right, lots of words. What does it mean in short? In short, it says as if you do have a variation and you incurred or were going to incur costs, and this variation now excludes payment for that item, you are entitled to a claim. And they then go on and they give a very good example. And this to me is actually a very good example of this process. Significance of this point is best illustrated by a typical example. If the contractor had ordered formwork for work which has subsequently been omitted by the variation, the accepted contract amount would typically have included direct costs plus profit in respect of the formwork. The contractor would then be entitled to recover costs and profit. However, the employer has this required to pay for the full cost, etc. So yeah, that I see it as a very good example. So the contractor audit formwork for a specific work, it could maybe be designated formwork. That part is now being removed for whatever reason, but the contractor incurred that cost or will incur that cost. He might have ordered this already. It is not an item in the bill of quantities that you can get, but it is a cost. So therefore, he is entitled to get access to that. Now, another example that you can use, let's say, for instance, you have got a pipe culvert and you audit the pipes. Now there's a variation, the pipe culvert is replaced with a bridge, but you've got the pipe, so what? So in this case, you can get a claim to get the pipes. But now if you look at this third one, this cost is, if this cost is not deemed to be included in the valuation of any substituted works. So maybe the engineer will say, yes, we cancel the pipe culvert with a bridge, but we consider that we need another pipe culvert at another place. So in this case, it's substituted work. So you use those culverts, you cannot claim for that. That is, in short, the situation. I think we can hand this over then the next question to Andy, and then we can come back to any questions. Or Jen, would you like to take the questions for this part now?
Andy, would you like me to read out the questions to you, or would you like to read out the questions?
No, I think Christiaan was asking if there are any questions related to the answer that he's just given yet.
Sorry, thank you. There have been no questions pop up in the Q&A box or even the chat.
I'll get on with my part of it.
Sorry, I spoke too soon. If not in the bill of quantities, who determines reasonable profit?
Now, if you look at this, then a contractor shall give upon receiving shall proceed. Okay, reasonable profit depends really on the contract, and it's one of those things where the contractor needs to prove what he considers as a reasonable profit, and the engineer has to review and accept that. Many of the contracts nowadays, actually as part of the tender, stipulates what is a reasonable profit. What is also interesting in the Pink Book, the Pink Book 2010 states that reasonable profit, and if it is not specified, it shall be taken as 5%. So in short, the answer is the contractor has to substantiate what he considers as reasonable profit, and the engineer has to approve that. One of the ways how you can do it is pull out your audit reports and show there what you have claimed for as a reasonable profit, or what you have claimed for as profit in your tax return, which is usually what you don't want to use. All right, so that is that answer. Anything else?
Nothing else has come through, so I think you have answered the question. Thank you very much.
Good. Maybe there's some questions that will pop up later, so I'll hang around and we'll hand over the chair to Andy.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, and thanks, Jen and Christiaan. A couple of things, if I can just wade in on Christiaan's answer there, is that first of all, in 2017, FIDIC have actually realised that people will spend days, weeks, months arguing about what is reasonable profit. So this is going back to the subject of this webinar, in fact, is avoiding disputes from the outset. FIDIC have actually done quite a good job in 2017, and as part of the tender submission and something that will be written into the contract, that reasonable profit percentage will be pre-agreed. It's amazing how long and how much effort I've seen people put into arguing, yes, it might be 5%, maybe it might be 7.5% or 10%. In terms of the project value or the profitability of the contract, this is so insignificant, whether it's 5% or 7.5%, it's not really worth the effort. What I've done in the past on a practical basis is a little bit more than what Christiaan suggested, and asked the contractor to show me his audited accounts for the past 3 years, which will show the company's profitability. And I've taken an average of that and said, right, I'm the engineer, I'm determining that this is a reasonable way of doing this to stop the arguments. But anyway.
That is what I actually meant, is use the audit reports, which usually supposed to go to the tax authorities. But the idea is use the audit reports. That is something which is defendable and sustainable approach.
Well, the other thing as well, Christiaan, is it's reasonable, isn't it? And that's what the engineer is supposed to be, being pragmatic about these things. And also the engineer should be working towards resolution rather than prolonging arguments. So, no,
absolutely. That is one of the things which I really enjoy in the new 2017, the increased emphasis on dispute avoidance. Which is really something I think we all need to look at, is ways how to avoid disputes rather than to resolve disputes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was supposed to be the topic of this webinar. It hasn't ended up like that. And to be honest, the questions that we received are not really on topic, but we've been asked the questions. So Christiaan and I will do our best to give our advice. In the new year, I will be presenting a webinar on dispute avoidance at the outset of the project. So keep your eyes peeled for the invitations to that one. Now, I've got 3 questions from Heino Fritz.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt you, Andy? Just before we move on, we did have one follow-up question from the original person who had asked Christiaan's question. So before we move on, I thought we could just pop back to that and Christiaan can have a follow-up.
Sure.
What is the difference between cost with a lowercase c and cost with an uppercase c?
Cost in the uppercase c is as defined in the contract, where cost is the general English terminology cost. Anything that is with a capital in the contract are usually terms as defined in clause 1. So, for instance, it specifically specify there what they consider as cost, what is defined cost. Just have a look at clause 1. It defines cost, that is cost with a capital C. The same, well, another interesting one in the 2017 now is notice has also been defined. So therefore in 2017 versions, you get notice with a capital N, where previously notice is a notice. The same with claims is now a defined term in 2017 version. So claim is now capital C. So as soon as it's a capital, it's usually a defined term or a contractual term, where cost otherwise is not. The cost with a small, without the capital, is just cost as you will find in the dictionary.
All right, thank you, Christiaan. And now we'll definitely move across to Andy. Thank you.
There's another question also. In the event there are omissions that amounts almost 20% of the base contract sum, but there are introduction of almost 30% of additional scope of work, is the contractor entitled to loss of profit for the omitted work? That in that case, you will balance that. Okay, Andy said he's going to answer that one live, but usually in the variation, you will then balance what you deduct and what you add.
Yeah, some of these questions, when they are, I mean, that's a tricky one, actually. I would need to sit down and think about that and study it. And this is the benefit of submitting your questions in advance, so that the people who are working on the webinar can take time and look at the contract and not be put in a position where they've got to answer difficult questions off the top of their head, which we are reluctant to do because we might be giving not very well considered advice. Anyway, down to the questions that I volunteered to answer. I'm not quite sure how these relate to dispute avoidance from the outset, but like I said, we've been asked the questions, so we will do our best to answer them. And it is 4 questions from Heino Fritz. Now, Heino, I'm a little bit confused. From your questions, I've deduced that you are talking about the FIDIC 99 Red Book form of contract. So I'll weight my answers towards that. I don't know whether you're talking about this from the position of the contractor or the position of the engineer or the employer. So I'll try to give a balanced answer from both sides. So the first question, the contractor has not given a notice in time. So presumably outside it's a notice of claim, and presumably it's outside the 28 days timeframes stipulated by FIDIC, and is weeks late. What to do now? Well, from the contractor's point of view, you've got to accept the fact that if you are in a common law jurisdiction, there's every likelihood that your claim won't be accepted because you've not complied with the conditions precedent for the submission of notices. In a civil law jurisdiction, it's probably not quite as clear cut as that, because if you have not sent a piece of paper that says notice on it, civil law doesn't come down in the same way as common law does and say you can't have anything. But beware, it's very dangerous to assume that if you are in a civil law jurisdiction, you don't have to submit your notices, because you do. There could be an argument that if you've signed up to a contract that says if I don't send a notice within time, I won't have anything, that could be an argument that would be put forward. There could be an argument that, well, a notice would only be applicable if the employer suffered damage from you not sending that notice. Or it could well be that if it was something that it was obvious that the employer and the engineer knew would cause a delay and for the contractor to incur costs, maybe you get away with it. My advice is always, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, if the contract says submit a notice of claim within 28 days, do it, because it's better to spend an hour doing that than pay lots of people like Christiaan and I, and lawyers and arbitrators and adjudicators and courts, etc., to argue the case and get you out of the hole that you've dug yourself into by not doing so. So, my favourite subject, looking at it from the employer's side with Hino's question, what does the employer need to do? Well, absolutely nothing, because it's not saying here that the contractor submitted a claim. And if there's no claim, there's nothing to respond to, there's nothing to address. So the action from the engineer, the employer there is no action required. Going on to question 2, excuse me. If the contractor has not given notice and has not handed in a claim in time, FIDIC says within 42 days of the event or at all, he has only one option to claim outside the contract under common law. Enrichment is legally not allowed. Okay, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't argue with that. Such a claim of enrichment has to be submitted after practical completion, or can it be submitted at any time? I must stress I'm not a lawyer. I can't give you legal advice. It depends, I would imagine, on the jurisdiction and whether it has to wait until practical completion or whether it can be submitted at any time. I can't really give you an answer to that. That is something that you would need to discuss with a lawyer. Going on, here to remember is the contractor failed to give notice. Well, if we are in common law, that would remove his entitlement to make a claim. and to submit the claim as per FIDIC Red Book 99 version. So does that mean that he didn't submit the claim in time within the 42 days, or he didn't submit detailed particulars of the claim, including his demonstration that he's entitled to make the claim? So again, I know I'm sorry, really, I don't quite understand the detail of this. But again, if the contractor didn't give a notice and it's common law, he's not entitled. If he didn't submit a claim and at all, well, there's nothing for the engineer to address. If he submitted it, but it wasn't in accordance with the requirements of the contract, it wasn't properly substantiated, it was an inadequately expressed claim, the engineer could reject it on those grounds, or could ask for further and better particulars. Your claim is basically rubbish. Please give me additional information so I can understand what you're talking about. So moving on to the third question. If the claim where no notice was given and the claim has not been submitted at all, so no notice, no claim, okay, and the claim should have been to ask for an extension of time and payment for prolongation costs due to COVID, or the COVID under FIDIC 99, what strategy can be followed now? Well, looking at it from a contractor's point of view, strangely enough, our consultancy practice has been approached by several contractors over the past few months to say, we've lost a fortune on our project because since COVID, the prices of materials, etc., have escalated out of all proportion to anything that would have been previously reasonable. What can we do? Well, our first reaction is, well, it's not what you can do now, it's what you should have done in 2020 when you started to incur these costs, that you should have sent a notice. You should have sent any claims that you think you're entitled to make back in 2020, not getting on for 2 years later. So you've immediately weakened your position. Under FIDIC, it's very doubtful, unless the increased costs have been caused by government action or legislation, that you will be entitled to claim for escalation of the cost of materials. But going back to the Heido's question, what strategy can be followed now? Well, our advice would be to, okay, let's try with a claim. If you've got entitlement, the fact that it's 18 months late is not helping your case, and see what happens. But really, contractors, if you leave your claims 18 months after they should have been submitted, you're really not helping yourself. Looking at the same situation from the other side of the contracting fence, well, again, it's the same thing. If no notice has been given and the claim has not been submitted, well, the engineer has got nothing to answer. No claim, no response. So on to the fourth question. Is there any known case law in the UK or any international courts about my questions that are known to Andy or Christiaan? Personally, no. Christiaan might wade in later. I deal with claims. I don't deal with law. I am of a firm belief, and the ICCP is of a firm belief, that if claims are managed professionally by the contractor, and if claims are managed professionally by the engineer, there will be no need to involve the law, because particularly where the contract is based on a robust form of contract, such as FIDIC or NEC or JCT, we can settle claims, just claims. I'm not talking about spurious claims that there's no real entitlement to. We can settle every claim at project level. So I don't really get involved in the law. I don't need to, because the claims that we deal with, either from a contractor's point of view or an employer's point of view, we manage to settle the vast majority of them without any disputes. So that's it from me, unless Jen knows any different.
Sorry, I was speaking with myself on mute. We do have 2 more questions that have come into the question box. So how about if I read out the first one and the 2 of you can do rock, scissors, paper, see who answers it.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so Omer asks, in FIDIC Conditions of Contract 2017, same as a position in FIDIC 2010 also, Clause 8.4 reads with Clause 20.1, it seems quite clear that notice is a condition precedent for the processing of extension of time, as the word shall is used, i.e. the notice shall be given as soon as practicable and not later than 28 days after the contractor became clear. I'm not sure, I think there might be something missing there. This clause seems to bite now, and it seems pretty stringent, isn't it? It seems too client-oriented and in fact may cause major problems in fact.
Omar, your interpretation is absolutely spot on. It says shall, so it's an obligation. And I do not think it's client-orientated. The reason for giving notice is to make the engineer and the employer aware that something may happen if an action is taken or is not taken, that something has happened that is delaying the contractor or causing him to incur additional cost, or that the contractor considers that he has entitlement to make a claim. Why do contracts place such importance on this to the extent that they say, if you don't send a notice, you can't have anything? Well, it's to make the engineer and the employer aware so that they can take mitigating action if necessary. Oh, I didn't realize that instruction that we gave to you was a variation and it's going to delay the project and cost us money. Let's not do that anymore. Mitigating action. I didn't realize that if we omit part of this work, you've already procured the materials. Going back to Christiaan's question, let's not omit that part of the work. Let's go back to the culvert instead of building a bridge, etc., etc. And if you don't give those notices, there's a very good chance that you will cause the employer financial harm. And this is why they do become conditions precedent. And contractors don't seem to realize this. They seem to think giving a notice is an act of aggression. It isn't. It's complying with the contract conditions that the employer asked you to sign. So why is it a bad thing to send a notice? Anyway, Omar, you're absolutely right. I disagree that it's biased towards the employer, and I disagree that it is an onerous thing to sit down at your computer and take an hour to say, dear Mr. Engineer, further to this and that, we feel that we are entitled to claim for an extension of time and additional cost, full stop, yours faithfully, the contractor. How difficult is that to do? It isn't, is it?
I think also to add on to that, Andy, is you mentioned that the contractor feels sometimes that notice to claim is a swear word, as I always say that. It's not the case. What you often also find is that the engineer stroke employer consider this as a slap in the face, which is so wrong. It's like a cricket game. The guys before the time arrange for the rules and they agree on the rules. And now why should one party get agitated if the other party follow? If one team follow the rules which you both have agreed on, why should you get agitated about that? And it's very definite. A notice, just go and read what the definition of a notice, not the contractual definition. A notice in the English language. A notice is to give someone information, to advise someone of something which he may not know. And that is the purpose of a notice. And that is the sole purpose of the notice. And that is why it is incredibly important to get that in as soon as possible, and do not leave that, because it is going to come back and bite you. There has been a few cases, and also coming back to Heine's question. I know of I think an ICC arbitration case in Kenya where the contractor didn't give notice, but then the arbitral tribunal ruled that because the engineer instructed and knew about the changes, he should have known. He cannot hide behind the fact that the contractor did not give notice. But that is risky to do that. Much easier to just get the notice in. There are ways how you can try and get around that, but at the end of the day, it is just so much less risk for the contractor to get the notice in on time.
And the real point there, Christiaan, is the fact that it had to go to arbitration to settle that matter.
True.
Had the contractor written that piece of paper that says notice on it, he wouldn't have incurred all those costs, would he, to settle the matter?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And again, something else that Christiaan mentioned is that, you know, why do the engineer, why do the employer view notices negatively? It's human nature. It's pointing out, in some cases with the engineer, particularly when the engineer is also the designer, very often a notice is sort of pointing the finger. There's a design problem here. There's a design error or omission. The engineer hasn't done something that he should do, or he's done something that he shouldn't do. So very often it is a little bit like drawing the employer's attention to the deficiencies of his engineer. But it's also human nature. Notices will invariably give information about impending bad news, delay, additional cost. None of that's good news to the project. And as humans, we don't like bad news, do we? So it's human nature to react negatively to it. I'm doing a training course for a government department somewhere in Africa at the moment, and what the focus of my training, and these are all REs and engineers, is doing your job as an engineer needs proactivity. It needs you to be proactive. It needs you to resolve problems. It needs you to be aware of problems, be aware of risks, and then go out there and work with the contractor to mitigate those risks and solve the problems. If you don't know there is a problem because you've not received a notice, you can't do any of that. So there again, Andy's on his high horse again. I do get passionate about certain things, especially when I see them being done wrong year after year after year.
Okay, so Omer had a follow-up, and then we have one more question. We've already run a bit over, but hopefully we can squeeze them in. Omer said, in some circumstances, the contractor may also prove his rights of claims through constructive notification rather than a written notice, i.e. the employer ought reasonably to have known that the work is being delayed, even though not specifically being notified formally. The contract administrator may owe a duty to the contractor and should act proactively and process the EOT claim, taking the contractor and employer on board in a positive manner.
Well,
if I can come in here, Omar, it sounds great on paper, but it doesn't work that in practice. For instance, the contractor is required to complete the work at the completion date. Is not required to complete certain sections of the work according to his program. So he's got the right and the entitlement to reschedule as much as he wants. So in the case where you say that the engineer or the employer should have known that it was going to delay, no, he could say, hold on, I expected it's your requirement to reschedule and make it work. And if you cannot, then you come to me and you tell me. So don't go that route. That is a risk that you put on. The guy can respond in that way. Put in the notice. Don't become a statistic.
Couldn't agree more, Christian. Sorry, that's my dog.
All right. I feel like that's an end.
Oh, it's at least not your wife, then it's good.
I do these webinars at home because it's quieter. So
All
much
right.
idea.
We've got one final question from Bruce, who asks, what is the name we call for if a contract has been beyond the original contract period, but we have sought the contractor for their instruction how to rearrange our site resources, such as machinery and labor resources. However, in vain, finally, the period we have done a piecemeal of work, but the actual cost is greater than our work done payment. A loss incurred, how can we build up our loss in this event?
I will send you my contact details at Hewitt Decipher Partnership. We would be quite pleased to give you consultancy advice on that. I am sorry, that's a little bit too complicated for either of us to absorb and to think about and give you a top of my head answer. So if you want to put it in an email, I will do my best to give you a considered response. But as I said, it is very dangerous for either of us to give it off the top of our head response to something as complicated as that.
Okay, well, if Christiaan could do one final follow-up to his original question from the original question asker, referring back to the first question, Christiaan, please explain form work as an example, but that will not qualify 12.4b because form work price is included in the contract price.
What they mean there with in this sum not forming part of the contract price is it in the bill of quantities? Can you measure this? Is this a measurable amount? You should often formwork is not measured separately. But now let's say it is measured separately, but it's not going to be used. He still had the cost for procurement of the formwork. That is not in the, that will usually be not in the bill of quantities. So the procurement of the cost at least is not paid. He may get paid for form work as a measurable item, but he is not paid if he has procured the form work, but he hasn't used it because of a variation. That is why it is still a payable item in that case.
All right, thank you very much, Christiaan, and thank you also, Andy. And thank you, everyone. It looks like everyone stuck around. We've gone about 15 minutes over, so I do appreciate both of you sticking around longer. We have just had one more question come through, but as we've already started our goodbyes, I will put that question, I've copied it, I will put it in our member-only LinkedIn group. So assuming you're a member, you can get your answer there.
Okay, thanks then. Goodbye.
Brilliant. Thank you,
right.
everyone. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.